There was a rule in this house for 2 years. Noodle wasn't allowed on the bed. I didn't arrive at that rule through any careful process. I didn't read a study or consult someone who walked me through the reasoning. I absorbed it somewhere between puppy class and a conversation at the dog park, and it became the way things were. The bed was mine. The floor or the couch on a good night was his. I said it with confidence when people asked. Dogs shouldn't be on the bed. When they pushed and asked why, I gave them an answer I didn't actually have. Something about hierarchy, something about signals. It sounded like it came from somewhere real, like there was a study behind it, or a century of animal behavior research, or at minimum a trainer who had explained it to me in terms I could recall. There wasn't. This video is about where these rules came from. There are a few things most of us believe about where dogs should sleep: the crate, the floor, the couch, the bed, and what each choice signals. Beliefs that move through the dog community like they're backed by something solid. I tracked some of them back to their source, and I want to tell you what I found. Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. Stay until the last one. That one changed something for me. Let me start with the one I repeated myself. Dogs are den animals. The crate is natural for them. It's their instinct. I said this at the dog park. I said it to friends who'd just gotten new puppies. I delivered it with the confidence of someone who'd heard it enough times that tracking the source had stopped feeling necessary. Maybe I'd read it somewhere. Maybe someone I trusted had said it. Either way, it had become mine, and I was passing it along. Here's what most people don't know. That sentence is about half true, and it's the wrong half. Wildcanids, wolves, their closest relatives, do use dens. That part is accurate. But den behavior in wolves is specific. It's tied to one purpose: whelping, giving birth, raising pups through the first weeks of their lives. When those weeks close, so does the den. Adult wolves in the wild don't den as a sleep preference. They rest in open space, in contact with the pack, exposed to the environment. You don't find adult denning documented that way in wildlife biology. The behavior is flexible, social, and driven by context, not fixed. What happened was that a partial truth got extended further than it could hold. Wolf pups use dens became dogs prefer enclosed spaces, became the crate is instinctive, and by the time it reached your puppy class, the reasoning had dropped out and only the conclusion remained: crate training works. I want to say that clearly because I'm not arguing against it. Plenty of dogs learn to genuinely rest in their crate, seek it out, settle quickly. But what's doing that work is conditioning, repetition, positive association, a setup the dog has learned to read as safe over time. That's not a denning instinct, that's learning. But the desire to feel enclosed and protected, that's a different drive entirely. And separating those two things changes how we respond when something isn't working. If your dog loves the crate, great. What built it was consistency, not biology. If your dog struggles with the crate, you're not fighting some ancient drive hardwired into their brain. You're working with a preference that hasn't been built yet. That's a kinder frame. It's also the accurate one. I said the den animal line probably 100 times before I thought to ask where I'd first heard it. I still can't answer that. Somewhere, someone said it, sounded right. I passed it on. That's how a lot of things travel in dog communities. And this is one of them. This is the one that kept Noodle off the bed for 2 years. Stay with me here, because it goes back further than most people realize. In 1947, a Swiss researcher named Rudolf Schenkel published a study on wolf behavior. He'd been observing wolves at the Basel Zoo, captive animals drawn from different family groups, placed together in a single enclosure. They competed for food, for space, for resources they couldn't escape. He documented what he called dominant and subordinate wolves, introduced the alpha and beta terminology, and described a hierarchy that he said governed the whole group. The framework migrated, first into animal behavior science, then into popular understanding, then into dog training. If you didn't establish yourself as the alpha, the dog would fill that role. And certain behaviors, sleeping at your level, on your furniture, on your bed, were read as signals, concessions of rank, your dog claiming ground. Here's the part that should have gotten more attention. David Mech, the wildlife researcher who spent decades in the field studying wolves, and who did more than almost anyone to bring the alpha concept into wider understanding, spent years publicly asking people to drop the terminology altogether. Not refine it, retire it. What he had described as alpha behavior in wild wolf packs, he said, was almost always parenting. Wild wolf packs are families. The lead animals are the parents. They don't win their position by defeating rivals. They have it because they started the family. The dominance hierarchy that Schenkel had documented in the zoo was a captive artifact. Unrelated animals forced together with no way out. That's not how wild wolves live. That's not how your dog lives either. The same year, veterinary behaviorists arrived at the same conclusion. The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior, the AVSAB, issued a formal position statement arguing that dominance-based frameworks had been incorrectly applied to companion animals. It wasn't about Noodle. It wasn't about the mattress. It wasn't about dominance. It was about a study done in a zoo in 1947, using wolves who had no other option, and a framework that traveled 60 years before its own architect asked us to let it go. I kept Noodle off the bed because of something a trainer mentioned once, based on research that the researcher himself had already walked back. I'm not angry about that. I say it because that's exactly how these things move, one confident voice to another. And I was one of those voices too. The rule was never really about your dog. This is the one that tends to survive the dominance conversation. A lot of owners who've let go of the alpha framework still hold on to this one, and I understand why. It feels like a separate concern. It's not about rank anymore. It's about attachment. The worry, if your dog is always with you at night, in your space, against your leg, will they struggle when you're not there? Will they be harder to separate? More anxious? More dependent? The fear has a logic to it. But there is something telling in what the co-sleeping research consistently fails to find. Christy Hoffman and her team at Canisius College studied co-sleeping, and they actually found it improved sleep quality and a sense of security for the humans involved. But what about the dogs? The fear is always that bed sharing creates behavioral problems, anxiety, or difficulty being alone. Yet behavioral experts consistently point out that what predicts separation anxiety isn't how close they sleep at night. It's the overall quality of the attachment. Here's the caveat, though. That study doesn't mean co-sleeping is the magic bullet for every household. Individual dogs are different. Some genuinely do better with their own space. Some have anxiety patterns that a separate sleeping setup genuinely helps manage. And if a vet or a behaviorist who actually knows your dog has given you specific guidance about this, that guidance is worth more than anything I say in this video. I'm not a vet, I'll say that clearly. What I'm saying is that the generalized fear, co-sleeping creates behavior problems, isn't what the evidence consistently supports. The first night Noodle was on the bed, I kept watching him. Not peacefully, in a monitoring way, waiting for something to shift, not more attached, not harder to separate, not more anxious, just Noodle. He still slept in his sunny rug spot in the afternoons, the one by the window he's had for years. Still lost his mind at the back door when a delivery truck came. His habits didn't reorganize around the new arrangement. He added it to the list of warm, familiar places, the way dogs do. And the thing I'd been guarding against for 2 years, the thing I'd been told would happen, didn't happen. I'd spent 2 years protecting a boundary that wasn't protecting anything. 2 years. The rule I mentioned at the start, I want to come back to it now, because this last one is where everything I've been circling lands. There's a belief that runs quieter than the den instinct, and quieter than the dominance thing. And it goes like this: dogs sleep better alone. Their own space, their own corner, their own schedule. That's what's healthy for them. This one gets sold as being for the dog, not against them. And it's worth a close look. I won't tell you the research on dog sleep is settled, because it isn't. What I can tell you is that the evidence for alone is better is close to non-existent. Wild canids are documented as social sleepers. They sleep in piles, overlapping bodies for warmth and early predator detection. Isolation for them is a vulnerability. They are wired to rest in contact with something warm, something known. The preference for isolated sleeping isn't documented as a biological default, and the claim that separation produces better rest hasn't accumulated meaningful support. What's documented is mostly the opposite. that dogs naturally seek shared resting spaces, attuning to the presence of the household rather than isolating themselves. There's a yellow lab 2 houses down named Moose. He belongs to my neighbor. She's had him for about 9 years now. I've watched Moose from across the fence for as long as I can remember. Big, slow dog, going gray around the ears. A little stiff in the hips on cold mornings. And years ago I noticed that he almost never sleeps in open space. Always against something. Always in contact with something solid. Last spring, I finally asked her, "Does Moose ever sleep in the middle of the room?" She thought about it. "Never," she said. "He always has to be touching something. The wall, my feet, the vent by the furnace in winter, something." I've been thinking about that conversation since. Maybe that's me reading too much into a neighbor's old lab. Maybe not. But I don't think I'm wrong about what Moose is tracking when he finds the wall. Dogs don't organize the world by surface type. They don't weigh the mattress against the floor, the crate against the couch. What they're tracking, what they have always been tracking, what everything in their background wired them to do, is proximity, whether something familiar is in the room, whether the thing that makes the space feel known is close enough to sense. I'm not telling you what your sleeping arrangement should look like. That's yours. And if there are any health or behavior concerns, that's a conversation for your vet, not a YouTube video. What I'm telling you is that the rules most of us inherited about where dogs belong at night were built on a model of dogs that the people who built it have since walked back. And underneath all of it, when the framework is gone, the dog is doing something much simpler than any rule accounts for. They're just trying to be near you. 2 years, that was Noodle off the bed. 2 years of a rule I'd absorbed somewhere and never thought to trace. The night I finally stopped following it, he jumped up, which he'd apparently been ready to do for some time, turned twice, and settled against my leg. He's been there most nights since. Nothing changed. Nothing fell apart. He was exactly who he'd been the night before, and the night before that. Except I stopped waiting for something to go wrong. And that, it turns out, is a better way to have a dog in your house. The rules came from somewhere. A zoo. A study. A framework that got separated from its origins and traveled a long time on confidence alone. I've tried to show you where. What you do with that is yours. Where does your dog sleep tonight? And did you choose that? Really choose it? Or did you inherit it the way I did? Tell me about it in the comments. I read everyone. Every single one. Until next time, give them a scratch behind the ears from me.